George, is at least 70 different species, and probably more. But yes, as odd as it sounds, there are little green men. That's not the ones we usually see, though. We see the little gray ones. They're about 4.5 feet tall. And we see the ones that are called the Nordics. They're about 7 feet tall, look like us, but they're invariably blonde hair and blue-eyed. They're one of the species that we have on ice. One of their crashes we recovered. Aliens and bad aliens and all kinds of ways and reasons for interacting with us. Genetic experiments, trying to... there's a misconception here. People think that our space brothers would bring us, good things and teach us how to get rid of all our diseases. And if you stop and think about it, that may not be the best thing, because if you had a society without any disease and everybody starts living 150 years, that creates a lot of problems. So they would not meddle in that. They were carefully guided by representatives from MJ12, who is this organization that is in charge of the cover-up, in order to get us ready for the release of the information that there are indeed aliens. And in both those movies, they used small little creatures and in order to get us ready for this release of information. Unfortunately, they're not so benevolent. So they made probably one of the most disastrous mistakes when E.T. was put out. At that time was before we discovered what I call the double cross or the grand deception. And they were trying to get us used to the benevolent little creatures, but that isn't the case. Well, the whole thing started in July 2nd, 1947. That was the first crash. July 6th is when they recovered it and sent it to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. July 7th is when they held the press conference and told the people it was a weather balloon, which the press bought hook, line, and sinker. September of that year, President Truman established MJ12, and the purpose of that was to study the saucers and cover up the existence of four from that particular crash. Yeah. They autopsied them. Dr. Detlef Bronk was the chief surgeon, so to speak. He was the one that named them EBEs. It stands for extraterrestrial biological entities. And we captured 3 live EBEs. They were numbered in their order of capture: EBE-1, EBE-2, and EBE in different crashes. EBE-1 lived with an Air Force colonel between 1949 and 1952. The EBEs are kept in an electromagnetic facility called a YY-2. It was designed by a Dr. Eric Wang, who worked directly for Dr. Kissinger, who has been in this cover-up since the very beginning. The reason they had to create an electromagnetic facility is the fact that the EBEs are so advanced, they're at least 500 million years advanced from us, and probably more. They can move by thought, and they can also disappear, but they can't move by thought through electromagnetic facilities. So they built this facility. There was 2, one in Los Alamos, and one either at Edwards or up at the test site at Groom Lake. Now there's still one EBE still living, EBE-3, and there is a videotape that eventually is going to be released to the public, and it's an interview with him. As hard as that may sound, as hard as that may be to believe, there is a videotape of an interview with EBE-3. I haven't seen the tape, so I don't know. But on this trip I told you I took gathering all this information, a guy in Albuquerque handed me 25 secret CIA memos. And if anything can be humorous in all of this, one of these memos, in the body of the text, it said, "By the way, EBE-3 wants to see the ocean. We better make the arrangements or he'll disappear again." So while he couldn't get out of this facility, he could make himself disappear and cause him a lot of trouble. They have special environment, special air. It's my understanding they can only last about 20 minutes in there. I think we made a deal with them, and their ultimate, what they want to do is regenerate their own race. Now, apparently they've either had some kind of nuclear accident, or they're on the backside of a evolutionary genetic curve, and they're going downhill instead of uphill. In other words, in the autopsies, of which I have 2, we found out that their digestive system is atrophied. They can't eat through their mouth anymore. You know how they eat? Well, these cattle mutilations, they take the hormones and the enzymes from those cattle and they spread it on their skin, and their skin absorbs the nutrients and then excretes the waste back through their skin. And if you read Whitley Strieber's book or listen to him talk, he's talks about when he's seen them doing this to their skin, and they're scraping the waist. Yeah, Strange Harvest was a good one, but another thing that happened here on March 4th, there was a documentary released on the best UFO photos that have been taken so far, including 1 minute and 38 seconds of videotape. Now, what happened is in November, this guy took these photos, took it into the TV station. They thought it was great, but nobody would believe it. So they spent 3 months checking the validity of the, authenticating the videotape and checking out the credibility of the witness. And when they had it all down, they put out this documentary, 30 minutes. I mean, it's ironclad. They're here. But do you think it got on the network? No. It was just showed locally in Pensacola, Florida, and they've had all kinds of physicists and scientists look at the film. It's absolutely authentic. There is nothing fraudulent about it. And it's really interesting. I just can't I can understand why the networks didn't pick it up, because each one is controlled by a member of MJ-12. Yeah, there's 1 minute and 38 seconds of it. It's great. And on one morning, he goes out with his camera, and 3 of them show up, and he has a spectacular shot of 3 of them. And on one of the shots, they tip the saucer so that they can see up in the inside in the bright glowing ring of however. No, that's for sure.
How does?
Nobody's put the question to them, because they've still got their stock response is the Air Force quit investigating UFOs in 1960. It's got something to do with what's going on now, and I can't even fathom what's going on. But it shouldn't be too long before we find out. And I tell you that a lot of Air Force pilots and planes have been, the pilots have been killed and the planes destroyed. The first one was the Thomas Mantell crash, January 7th, 1948. He was in a P-51, and he was chasing a flying saucer, ordered to chase one, and he got up to it and said, "Oh my God, it's huge," and that's the last thing they heard of him. 1948 was the second crash of a flying saucer near Aztec, New Mexico. 1950 was the third crash near Laredo, Texas, about 30 miles inside the Mexican border. 1952, we had 2 weekends in a row where the UFOs flew over the Capitol, Washington, D.C., buzzed the White House. Despite pictures and radar confirmations of the objects, the Air Force said it was a temperature inversion. Made all the newspapers, but it's been such a fantastic mental programming that we've been forced to forget this. It was in the papers. It was one of the most spectacular UFO events in history. 2 weekends in a row. They told the Air Force line it was temperature inversion, but they had pictures of them. And it was just said it was temperature inversion. The government established an intensive program of ridicule against anyone who said they saw flying saucers. And fear of ridicule was the foundation on which the cover-up was placed. Nobody likes to be ridiculed. And they built that fear into anybody so that nobody would talk about it. 1952, Eisenhower was elected. He was briefed by Hillenkotter. Eisenhower, being military, took steps to ensure that the secret was kept. Because of his military background, he made it more military-oriented than, say, a civilian president would have. And it's this, I think, that has let his actions let the real power of the executive office slip through the hands of the president into MJ-12. He was briefed, and he set it up. And interesting thing, in late 53 or early 54, Eisenhower witnessed an alien demonstration of technology and power at Muroc Dry Lake, which is now called Edwards Air Force Base. Witnesses who were there. The president was there. There's an English guy. He passed away. He either passed away just recently, but before he did, he was the last living person who was present at that meeting. And he said that Eisenhower told the aliens that the world was not ready for him. And nothing happened until the first part of the 60s. Several more crashed in the 50s. In 1960, Kennedy was elected. Eisenhower was the last president to have a full briefing on the alien problem. There was a disdain of elected officials throughout the intelligence and military communities, and they just didn't like elected officials. So every president since then has not had high enough clearance to know the whole problem. Now they know there's aliens, they know we've recovered saucers, and they know that we're trying to get technology. But there are certain other things which probably only about 25 people on the face of this earth know. Now, on April 25th, 1964, was the first official communication between our government and the aliens. 3 saucers landed there by prearranged agreement. It was filmed by 5 high-speed cameras, 68,000 feet of film. The reason we know this is because in 1972, when they were going to release the first information about UFOs to the public, a very knowledgeable writer, his name was Robert Emenager, was asked by the agency to write a documentary, which he did. And they were going to release this thing, and we had the whole history of the UFOs, and the last part of the documentary was the footage of the saucer landing. But in 1973, when they're ready to go, we had Watergate, and they were faced with 2 problems. Number 1 is they didn't think the public could handle 2 traumatic experiences at the same time, and number 2, they thought that the public would perceive this picture of aliens and spacecraft as a ploy by Nixon to divert the attention from Watergate. So they shelved it. The documentary actually came out. It was narrated by Rod Serling, but instead of the real footage, they had drawings of these flying saucer landing, and they said, Rod Serling says, let's consider an event that could possibly happen in the future or may have already happened. But it did already happen. But what happened? No, he said when he was during his campaign, he said, if I become president, I'll make every piece of information this country has about UFO sightings available to the public and the scientists. I'm convinced that UFOs exist because I've seen one. But MJ-12 got to him, and they explained how important it was to keep it a secret. And apparently he agreed with them because we never heard anything from Carter. At the end of the 60s, when then I believe we made a deal, 1973, 1980, were cattle mutilations. 14,000 cattle mutilations all over Canada, United States, South America, and we believe that they used the parts of the cattle for food or genetic experiments. And there was a documentary made by Linda Moulton Howe called Strange Harvest, and we were particularly prevalent around Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. And it was a documentary made by Linda Moulton Howe for the CBS affiliate in Denver. There have been some humans. It's a very, very sensitive subject. I'm going to steer away from that. But I will tell you that since the beginning of this year, there have been over 200 animal mutilations on Long Island. It's supposedly a big secret. I know that there's 4 major law enforcement investigators working in plain clothes. Yeah, Long Island, New York. We have an investigator working with us who's sending us videotape and keeping us informed of what's going on. So it still is a problem.
What they're doing.
Well, food or genetic experiments, take your choice. That's one of the stories when we began to discover what I call the Grand Deception was in 1979, and apparently there was some kind of clash. 1983 is the date that I call that we finally recognized that we had made a disastrous mistake. And that's when MJ-12 realized that they were in deep, deep trouble. They had made a deal with these people, and it had not worked out, and now the question was what to do. There's really no way to get ready for it. The reason I think it's coming is because I have contacts within the government that tell me that they're bracing themselves for something, but they're not going to tell us about it. George, maybe the cover-up was in our best interest, maybe not. Maybe the government underestimated the intelligence of the American people and decided we just couldn't handle it. But let me tell you this, the truth is still the truth, and nothing can change that. Not the military, not the government, and not me.